Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I am live tonight. Um, we'll be live for a little while here. I'll be reading from a particular book, what we call Tavistock Institute, and which was a book written by John Coleman years ago. I'll be reading the chapters 5 and 6 and 7 tonight. Um, Most are not aware that John Coleman at one time was within Tavistock. And I guess he had a change of heart and realized that he was not going to be a part of this. And so, if you don't understand what is happening here in the last, well, it's been going over almost 100 years, folks, Tavistock is. But what's clear is that how they control the narrative. They continue to control it, and they lead us to where they want us to go. And most of us are completely unaware that we are being shuffle down the road and what they want us to think, and to destroy those who oppose it as those who are progressives or think that this is moving forward when reality it is not. It's a self-destruction. So we're going to be reading here tonight from chapter 5, 6, and 7. And we'll see how that goes. And I welcome you here tonight. And again, this is a book that's really hard to come by, and if you do find it, it's well worth its weight. If you can even get a copy of it in the library and read it yourself, it would be well worth it also. So here we go. Thank you for being here, and if you have any comments, you're welcome to share tonight in a live broadcast. So chapter 5 starts as, do we have what H.G. Wells called an invisible government? As I have previously related, the modern science of making public opinion through advanced techniques of manipulating mass opinions began at one of the West's most advanced propaganda factories situated in Great Britain at the Wellington House. That's Wellington House. This facility, dedicated to social engineering and creating public opinion as the commencement of World War I, was under the leadership of Lord Rockmere and Northcliffe and the future Director of Studies of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Arnold Toynbee. Wellington House had an American section, which was mainly the prominent members were Walter Lippmann and Edward Bernays. As we have discovered later, Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, a fact carefully hidden from public view. Yes, it is so critical that you understand that many of these people who are involved in this are actually related, family related. Okay, let's continue. Jointly, they create work on techniques to mobilize and support for World War I among the masses of people who were opposed to war with Germany. The public perception was that Germany was a friend of the British people, not an enemy. And the British people saw no need to fight Germany. After all, was it not true that Queen Victoria was the cousin of Kaiser Wilhelm II? Toynbee and Lippmann and Bernays worked to persuade them that war was necessary using the techniques of the new science through new arts of mass manipulation via the communication media. And that communication media at that time was radio, okay, and also naturally newspapers. For its propaganda purposes, tinged with willingness to lie, which was just getting into its stride, having learned a great deal of experience during the Anglo-Boer War. And I want to share a little bit. I did a video on the Boer War probably a few years ago in my Discerning What is True channel. Most are unaware that Winston Churchill participated in this. At that point, this particular war was a huge, from 1899 to 1902, a deal for Britain because they had to ship all these arms and all these things by ship in order to fight on the land of what we would call today South Africa. And actually, the Boers, which are Dutch, what they call Dutch Afrikaners, Afrikaner is a what we call a mix of the African language and the Dutch language, and that's what they're called today. They're called Afrikaners. And I remember taking a political science class talking about American foreign policy dealing with Southern Africa back in the 1980s, and how we eventually pushed a particular deal when the apartheid deal, which I was not for that, but I also wasn't for what I call what is taking place in the last 15 to 20 years in South Africa. The whole country is, at one time, it was the economic juggernaut of Africa immensely. Today is heading towards third world nation status, similar to what I call the issue with Rhodesia and becoming Zimbabwe. Anyway, what caused the defeat of the Boers was the implementation of concentration camps that was done by Britain with women and children. Most are not aware of this. They always blame the Germans for this, but in reality, this is so true of everything. When someone points the finger at you, it's true of who they are. You see, they point something out and says, this is what you're about. You did this, such and such. When in reality, they're talking about themselves. That's how clever propaganda is these days, folks. Those that do that, if you recall, even during George Bush's stint in the White House, they would claim that the Iraqis were subhuman or half human. In other words, it was a whole publicity deal. Again, part of propaganda, all propaganda to do with that they were mistreating the children. They've always used that as an excuse to get people involved in wars. When, if it was true, 99% of the people were not involved in it anyway. The reason why Britain was doing this was they wanted to eliminate Germany as an economic juggernaut also. So let's continue on. It was not only the British public whose perceptions of events had to be altered, but also the changing of the mind of the American public. To this end, Bernays and Lipperman were instrumental in getting Woodrow Wilson to establish the CREEL committee, which created the first body of methodology techniques for disseminating of successful propaganda and for the science of polling to secure the correct opinion. This is what I speak about voting. Voting is consent, folks. It's as plain as day. It's clear. You don't have a horse running here that's actually representing you. You have usually two horses, Republican and Democrats, that are running, and they basically both what I would call talk a lot, but when it comes down to the point, neither side is actually even has any resemblance of trying to help the people, period. Okay, that's what they are. But most people they consider themselves good Americans if they vote. Well, I'll differ with that. The best thing you do is actually not vote. The best thing you can also do is go to your county and take your name off the rolls too, because they need consent in order for them to do what they do. And by your beliefs in the military, your beliefs in voting, all these things is that you're giving them consent. It's a very clear deal here. It's very easy to see if you want to see. But you have been indoctrinated so heavily that you're in fear a lot of times. Well, I don't know if I want to vote for this guy. He's really a bad guy, so I'm going to vote for less of the two evils. And when you start thinking logically, if you do, you're choosing evil no matter what. That's what you're choosing. If you notice also, one quick thing also is about the whole mechanism that goes on. There's enormous money given to both candidates in behalf of many corporations and industry here in the United States. Let's continue to go on. From the beginning, the techniques were designed in such a way that polling, public opinion making, was based on one obvious but striking feature. It was concerned with people's opinions, not with their understanding of the process of science. Thus, by intent, the posters elevated a central irrational element of mind to a primary level of public focus. This was a conscious decision to undermine the grasp of reality of masses of people in an increasingly complex industrial society. Have you ever watched Fox News where viewers are given the results of a poll about what Americans are thinking? And then for the next for the next hour, you find yourself shaking your head and wondering what the results of the poll reflected about your own thinking process? Then you could only have felt more puzzled than ever. The key to understanding Fox News and the poll might lie in what Lippmann had to say about such matters. In his 1922 book, Public Opinions, Lippmann outlines Tavistock psychological warfare methodology. In his introductory chapter, The World Outside and the Pictures in Our Head, Lippmann stressed that the object of study of the public opinion social analysis is reality as defined by internal perceptions or images of that reality. Public opinion deals with indirect, unseen, and puzzling facts, and there is nothing obvious about them. The situations to which public opinions refer are known only as opinions. The pictures inside the heads of these human beings, the pictures of themselves or others, or of their needs, purposes, and relationship, are their public opinions. Those pictures which are acted upon by groups of people or by individuals acting in the name of groups are public opinion with capital letters. The picture inside so often misleads men in their dealing with the world outside. From this evaluation, it is easy to take the next decisive step made by Bernays, that the elites who run society can and do marshal the resources of mass communication to mobilize and alter their herd mind. Herd is H-E-R-D. 1 year after Lippmann's book, Bernays authored Crystallizing Public Opinion. He followed that in 1928 with his book entitled, quite simply, called Propaganda. It's not in your, I mean, these guys are right out in your face here, folks, if you want to really actually sign out what they're doing. This is in 28. We're almost 100 years from that, 6 years. Will actually be 5 years eventually. In his first chapter, Organizing Chaos, Bernays wrote, the conscious and intellectual manipulation of the organized habit and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men that we have never heard of. Our invisible governors are in many cases unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. Whatever attitudes one chooses to take towards this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a tripling fraction of our triple fraction of our 120 million who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. And this is referring to 120 million people at that time phrase. It's now 200. It's actually over 325 million. It is they who pull the wires, which controls the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. In Propaganda, Bernays follows his praise of the invisible government by underscoring the next phase that propaganda techniques would follow. A civilization has become more complex, and as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means has been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. With the printing press and the newspaper, the telephone, the telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can spread rapidly and even instantaneously over the whole of America. To back up his point, Bernays quoted a member of Public Opinion Manipulation. H.G. Wells, he cited a 1928 article in the New York Times in which Wells welcomed modern means of communication for opening up a new world of political processes and for allowing the common design to be documented and sustained against perversion and betrayal. For Wells, the advent of mass communication leading up to television meant fascinating new paths for social control beyond the wildest dreams of the earliest mass manipulation fanatics of the British Fabian Society. We shall return to this vital important subject later herein. Chapter 6. Mass communication ushers in polling industry. For Bernays, his recognition of Wells' ideas won him a key place in the hierarchy of U.S. public opinion controllers. And in 1929, he won a position at CBS, which had recently been taken over by William Paley, P-A-L-E-Y, a very key individual here. By the same token, the advent of mass communications ushers in the polling sampling industry to organize the perceptions of the masses for the media mafia, part of the invisible government, running the show from behind the scenes. So what I want you to understand what he's saying simply is that the media and the government are actually working together as what we call in a mesh with a gear. Is allowing to work what they want the public to know, how they want to control them, how they want them to think, and eventually to get them to decide on what they're doing and giving their wholehearted support to that. In 1935-36, polling was in full swing. In the same year, Elmo Roper began his Fortune magazine for surveys, which evolved into what people are thinking column for the New York Herald Tribune. George Gallup initiated the American Institute of Public Opinion. In 1936, he opened up the British Institute of Public Opinion. Gallup was to headquarter his activities around Princeton University, intermeshing with the Office of Public Opinion Research Institute for International Social Research / Psychological Department Complex, run by Haley, H-A-D-L-E-Y, Cantrell, spelled C-A-N-T-R-I-L, who is destined to play an increasingly important role in developing the psychological profiling methods later to be used in manufacturing the Aquarian conspiracy. In the same 1935 and 36 period, the first time use was made of polling in presidential elections under the impetus of two newspapers owned by Cowles, C-O-W-L-E-S family, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, and the Des Moines Register. The Cowles are still in the news business. Based in Spokane, Washington, they are active opinion makers, and their support of the Bush War in Iraq was a crucial factor. It is not certain who introduced the practice of advisors to the president, those persons who are not elected by the citizen and whom they have no opportunity to vet, but who decide the internal and external foreign policies of the nation. Woodrow Wilson was the first American president to make use of that practice. Opinion research in World War II. They were all small lead-ups to the next phase, triggered by two important intersecting developments. The arrival of an immigrant psychological warfare expert named Kurt Lewin, L-E-W-I-N, in Iowa, and the involvement of the United States in World War II. World War II provided the emerging Tavistock social scientists with enormous scope for experimentation. Lewin's leadership put together the key force that would deploy after World War II to utilize these techniques developed in warfare against the population of the United States. And in fact, in 1946, Tavistock declared war on the civilian population of the United States and has remained in the state of war ever since. The basic conception expounded by Lewin, Wells, Bernays, and Lippmann remain in place as the guideposts for manipulation of public opinion. The war gave the social science the opportunity to apply them in highly concentrated form and to bring together a large number of institutions under their direction to further the ends of their experiment. And what he's saying simply is we're going to see the modern phenomenon here, what we call the think tanks. There are people like the RAND, R-A-N-K, the Hudson Institute, the Hoover Institute. There are many of them. There are probably over 100 of them, if not more. So these are the key individuals that are going on that make policy, you see, and you swallow that by reading their journals or magazines, and you begin. So you don't have an independent mind here. You're being set up by these people in certain ways, the way they look at the way to look at the world. The Core Institute, which was the vehicle for making public opinion, was the Committee on National Morale, ostensibly established to mobilize support for the war, in much as President Wilson has set up his management committee to manage World War I. Its real purpose was to carry out the intensive profiling of both the Axis and Americans population for the purpose of creating and maintaining a means of social control. The committee was headed by several leaders of American society, including Robert P. Bass, Herbert Bagnard Swart, spelled Swart, S-W-O-P-E, among other nobles. Its secretary was Margaret Mead's husband, George Baston, B-A-T-E-S-O-N, one of the principal instigators of the CIA notorious MK Ultra LSD experiments that some experts consider as the launch vehicle for the U.S. counterculture of drugs, rock, and sex. Remember, Margaret Mead is also important here, people. There are some people out here that I exchange some ideas with on Facebook, and they're just completely mesmerized by Margaret Mead as though she's some kind of great person. In reality, she's not. The people think, oh, she comes to this new light or something, how to see how life is, you see. And what she did was she introduced ideas in the psyche that in today are notorious going on. Some of those things simply is to do with homosexuality. Some of those things also to deal with the difference of color and marrying a different color of a person. You see. What was once moral taboo is now becomes popular. It's more than that, though. Let's just give you a slice of the pie here. The committee board of trustees included poll taker George Gallup, intelligence agent Ladisa, I'll spell this to you, Ladislas Barago, and Tavistock psychologist Gardner Murphy. The committee ran a number of special projects, the most important being a major study on how best to wage psychological warfare on Germany. The key personnel critical to this development of public opinion process were, again, Kurt K. Lewin, who was a part of the education and history, psychological, and social science, Professor Gordon W. Allport, psychology, Professor Edwin G. Borin, psychology, Professor Haley Cantrill, psychology, Ronald Lippitt, Lippitt, into social science, Margaret Mead, with the area of anthropology, social science, youth, and child development. The staff numbered more than 100 researchers who comprised the staff of the committee and several opinion profiling institutes critical to the project. One such a special project team was in the Office of Strategic Services, that's the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, composed of Margaret Mead, Kurt Lewin, Ronald Lippitt, Derwin Cartwright, John K. French, and public opinion makers like Samuel Stoffler, later chairman of the Laboratory Social Relations Group at Harvard University, Paul Lazarsfeld of Columbia University, Sociology Department, who developed with profiler Harry Laswell on the opinion research methodology for the OSS based on detailed content analysis of the local press of enemy countries. And Renis, I'll spell this to you. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm just going to spell it to you. R-E-N-S-I-S. Laqueur, I guess is how you pronounce it. L-I-K-E-R-T. Laqueur, a prudential insurance company, key executive immediately before the war, had perfected profiling techniques as the director of research for the Life Insurance Agency Management Association. This equipped him to interact favorably with the head of the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, who was the former head of Prudential Life Insurance Company. Leclerc served as director of the Division of Morale of the Strategic Bombing Survey from 1945 to 1946, in which position he had enormous scope for mass public opinion profiling and manipulation. Chapter 7, The Making of Public Opinion. According to Tavistock Institute records, the Strategic Bombing Survey played a key role in forcing Germany to its knees through a highly disciplined program of systematic bombing of German workers' housing. Did you hear that? It was not to, they didn't strategically went after the manufacturing sector. They went after the German worker housing, which Sir Arthur Harris of the RAF was only too delighted to carry out. There's a particular book that's been put out, and I've just, I think it's called Terror Storm or Hellstorm, one of those two. that deals with what the Royal Air Force and the United States Air Force used against Germany with their immense bombers. The Air Force, the only two countries in the world at that time had what we call the four engines heavy bombers, which was used by the Royal Air Force and U.S. Air Force. In addition, from 1939 to 45, LeCurt ran the Division of Program Surveys of the Department of Agriculture, from which major studies were undertaken, the techniques of mass persuasion, or to put it another way, making public opinion to fit their desired goals. See, that's what this is all about, to be in congruency in a way to get the American people following their lead, you see, and then realizing they're getting that support, that consent again. One can only speculate on the number of citizens who believed their support for the Allied war effort sprang from their own opinions. In other words, it would say they thought of these things when in reality it was planted in their own heads. That's how satanic this is all about. One of LeCurt's key aides in the division was Lewin's protege and future Tavistock operator Dorwin Cartwright, who wrote the textbook document titled Some Principles of Mass Persuasion, which is still in use today. Another major agency for shaping public opinion was the Office of War Information, directed by Gardner Cowles. For much of the war effort, Bernays was brought into OWI as an advisor. It is out of the nexus we have described here that the network of key polling institutions emerged after World War II. They have played a powerful and decisive role in American life ever since. Gallup, from the Committee on the National Board of Trustees, upgraded his activity and became the key commander of polling institutions for launching new policies of the Committee of 300, which he passed off as polling results. Note that Mr. Coleman also wrote a book on the Committee of 300. Bernays played several key post-war roles. In 1953, he wrote a paper for the State Department that recommended setting up a psychological warfare office by state. In 1954, he was a consultant to the U.S. Air Force, the Armed Forces branches, most under the influence of strategic bombing survey people. I think that strategic bombing survey project. During this early 1950s period, Bernays was public relations counsel to the United Fruit. I don't know if you know who United Fruit is, and I can give you an enormous history about this company, which is now Chiquita, which is called United Brands at this time. They dropped the United Fruit because they have such bad press because of what they did in Guatemala way back in the 1910s, 1520s, and how Woodrow Wilson was involved with that and how the military got involved in Guatemala. No one hardly even knows this, that our military was involved in Guatemala and was there for many years because the people would not work for what they were paying them. They were just slaves, and they rejected it. I got off on a tangent here. One of the leading corporations in the communication national security apparel, Eisenhower's military-industrial complex, then busy with consolidating its power over U.S. policy. Bernays conducted the propaganda campaign alleging Guatemala was falling under communist control. There was no communist control here, folks. Come on. That resulted in U.S. engineer coup in that country. This is what we do, folks. This is what we've been doing for half a century. In 1955, Bernays wrote a book about his experience titled The Engineering of Consent. The book became the virtual Tavistock blueprint followed by the U.S. government to overthrow any government and any country whose policies were unacceptable to the one world government socialist dictatorship. You have to understand that your country is being ruled by people who are actually wanting a one world government. You've got to get that in your head, folks. Both candidates who run for office, they may say certain things, but in reality, simply they're moving completely in that direction. And I, being a political science major in the late 70s and early 80s, saw that for sure because we were also introduced to world government even in our classes. In political science classes, they were talking about this. And I was strictly very much opposed to it because I knew what it was all about. Even at the age of 19 or 20 years old, I knew it was also a form of programming, you see. Bernays was a member of the Society for Applied Anthropology, one of Margaret Mead's social control institutions inside the U.S., and Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, a group created by John Rawlings Rees, a founding member of Tavistock, to run psychiatric shock troops among the American population. One of his first actions was the unlashing of homosexuality in Florida, a move bitterly opposed by Anita Bryant, who had no idea what she was up against. The second of his actions was to introduce the theme that non-white people are more intelligent than whites, which we shall discuss later. Lecoq moved to the university. Do you understand what they're doing here? Do you understand? The second of his actions was to introduce the theme that non-white people are more intelligent than white. So what he's doing is dividing people. That's what he's doing. And in reality, simply, with that taking place, the enemy itself gets away with murder, and people are fighting among themselves. Same thing today, folks. Same thing. The whole thing with the Republican Democratic Party is completely divided. Done on purpose. To keep people divided also. So that you suspect your neighbor over here or your other neighbor over here that they're such and such. They might be an enemy of the state. Do you see this? It's all planted here. Lecoq moved to the University of Michigan to set up the Institute for Social Research, the ISR, that absorbed the Massachusetts Center for the Study of Group Dynamics, the principal Tavistock affiliate in the U.S. in the beginning of the post-war era. The Tavistock ISR was the center of a number of critical profiling and opinion research subgroups, among them the Center for Research and Utilization of Scientific Knowledge, was established by Lecoq's OSS co-worker and Lewin's disciple, Ronald Lippitt, Lippitt. Project director Donald Michael was a leading player in the Club of Rome, and a second subgroup, the Survey Research Center, was Lecoq's own personal creation that grew to become the most elaborate institution in the United States for surveying, that is creating popular attitudes and trends among the principal which were demeaning and degrading for women, and pushing the superior intellectual capabilities of non-white persons, according to Lewin, carefully crafted scripts. Continue. Robert Hutchinson became famous during this period, and his closest colleague in these early years was William Benton, founded in 1929 with Chester Bowles of Benton, and Bowles, the well-known advertising firm. Benton utilized Benton and Bowles as a means to develop the science of mass control through advertising. Are you aware, probably 25 to 30 years ago, that they prohibited commercials on television to do with doctors and lawyers? Did you know that? The reason why they did that, and now why is such a mess, it was Benton's pioneering work, supported by Douglas Cater, C-A-T-E-R, that led to the development of Tavistock bargaining control over U.S. media policy through the Aspen Institute of Colorado. That's another think tank, folks. It is the American home of the Socialist One World Government Committee of 300. In passing, I mentioned that the science, one I want to point about what Coleman does is he connects the dots here. That's what he's doing. He's connecting the dots that these certain groups are working together. Okay, that's what he's doing, showing you what, because he was actually with them and he saw what they were doing. In passing, I mentioned that the science of mass media control through advertising is today so firmly entrenched that it has become the key component in opinion making. In the early post-World War II days, Hollywood incorporated it into nearby all of its movies. Advertising, which is basically brainwashing, was done through the type of makeup car the hero drove. Now let me explain what he's saying here. You'll notice that in my day, it advertised, say, for a car. The whole idea of the ad then was simply how well made it was, And it was strong. It did what it was supposed to do. It got so many miles per gallon, that type of thing. What's happened now, they don't even talk about that hardly at all. All they do is talk about your feelings of being in that car and how it makes you feel. Has nothing to do, it's only what they call this, how you feel, in, what it will have to do with how the type of character you are, such and such. It has nothing to do with how the car runs or anything of that nature. Nothing to do with the horsepower, how well it's made, where is it made at, nothing of that nature. It's based upon feelings. It's based upon feelings of ego to impress you and why you drive down the road. Why you may only get 10 miles a gallon. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that's what I'm saying. So Hero drove the brand of cigarettes the squaw Lawrence Harvey smoked, the clothes and makeup of the leading lady wore, clothes that became more risque with each passing year until today. In 2005, we have womanhood degraded by the likes of Britney Spears, almost naked breasts and bare stomach exposed by crotch-hugging jeans she often wears. The social morals that Hollywood enjoys so much in floundering. Let's continue. I'm going to go on to chapter 8 here. These are all wars to destroy the family. Okay. Chapter 8, degrading women and decline of moral standards. The pace of degrading womanhood has quickened at a remarkable degree since hemlines reached the knee. This is manifested itself in such areas as near pornography in mainstream movies and soap operas, and we venture to suggest that the day is not far off when such scenes will be totally and mandatory. The decline in attractive feminine speech can be traced to Tavistock methodology and its practitioners. Cantrell, Lacour, and Lewin. Another noticeable change was the increase in movies featuring a interracial dating and sexual encounters coupled with human rights claims for lesbians in the most blatant open form. Special people were selected and trained for this task. Probably the best known of many being is Ellen DeGeneres, I don't know how to pronounce the name, DeGeneres, Degeneres, who receives hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of free publicity under the guise of being interviewed on talk shows and discussion groups on the subject of same-sex love, meaning encountering between two females involve a type of sex practice. See what they're doing is they're doing all these things that what Americans used to value that was kept in the closet or in the bedroom is now out in the open. It's a form of brainwashing. Benton, the pioneer in degrading womanhood, had as his mentor social science leading expert in profiling theory at Tavistock, one named Harry Laswell, who together with Benton founded the American Policy Commission in 1940. Laswell joint venture with Benton's marked the clearest link between Aspen hidden socialist one world government operations in America and the Tavistock Institute. Aspen became the headquarters of the Committee of 300 branches in the United States. So what's happening here, in order to destroy a society and a civilization, you always have to go to the family, and that is always to destroy it from within. It's the bedrock, it's the foundation of that society. And when you destroy that, then what happens simply is mommy and daddy don't love each other anymore, but also simply is the offspring, the children simply are not getting what we would call love and attention that once was, and also taught what I would call good moral ways of carrying on with the opposite sex. Also to be able to be someone who is responsible in that regards with men. Headley, Cantrell, Likert, and Lewin, with their humanistic psychology, brainwashing, and applied methodologies, played in increasing vital roles in using opinion researchers to bring about a paradigm shift, value shifts in society, such as those just described, but on an expanded range and reaching into every level of society that comprises Western civilization as it had been known for centuries. Cantrell's home base from where he conducted his war operations against the American people was the Office of Public Opinion Research, actually at Princeton University. So all these schools All these schools, a lot of these schools are actually involved in getting government contracts, folks. They get government contracts. One in Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Business, Princeton, Stanford, UCal, University of California at Berkeley, University of Chicago, Columbia University, and there are more in those, folks. That's just a few of them. Founded in 1940, the same year in which Cantrell wrote his book entitled "The Invasion from Mars." A detailed analysis about how the population in New York and New Jersey area reacted with the fear and panic to Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938. So they did this broadcast to see how they can create the fear mentality of alien invasion, which was not true at all. Not true at all. In order to see how people would react. How could they have known that they were part of a profiling venture, since it is reasonable to conclude that in 1938, not 1 in 5 million had ever heard of Haley Cantrell or the Tavistock Institute? It would be interesting to find out how many Americans have heard of Tavistock now in 2005. I doubt there's even 2% of the population knows anything about this. In fact, that's probably less than that. Most would remember Orson Welles, but the probabilities are that 99% of the population would not attach any significance to the name of Cantrell or have any knowledge of the Tavistock Institute. Let us recount the events of the night of October 30th, 1938, because the same techniques had been used by the Bush administration, the Defense Department, and the CIA to shape the public perception of the events that led up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And are still very much in use in 2005. It is amazing when you think about what happened in 2001, folks. That some guy in a cave was able to do this. That's all bullshit. They lead you down this, and most people are completely oblivious of what's going on. Completely oblivious. Continue on. In 1938, Orson Welles had created quite a reputation for himself as a master at staging false news events by making use of the English author H.G. Wells, a former MI6 operative, do you know that, and his book, The War of the Worlds. In the radio adaptation of Wells' work, the other Wells interrupted radio programs in New Jersey with announcing that Martians had just landed. The Martians' invasion had begun, said Orson Welles. During the 4-hour-long production, it was announced no less than 4 times that what radio audiences were listening to was a fictitious reenactment of what it would be like if H.G. Wells' story had come to life. But that availed nothing. Panic gripped millions of people who fled from their homes in terror, jamming roads and communication systems. Could that also be what's happening that took place just recently in New York? To do with the snowstorm that took place there? Could it? And why people lost their lives going out on the roads during the bad weather? When it would have probably been far safer for them to be at their homes to actually stay warm, and yet they got in their cars? Is that a form of psychological warfare? Since this storm has been broadcast since, probably a week and a half before the storm even happened, folks. Think about that. Is that itself programming? It is. It is. Let's continue. What was the purpose of the hoax? In the first instance, it was to gauge just how effective Cantrell and Tavistock methods were in practice, and perhaps of greater importance, it was to set the stage for the coming war in Europe, in which news broadcasters would play a crucial role in information gathering and dissemination as an established source of reliable information, as well as a forum for directing public opinion. 2 days after the Martian invasion news broadcast, an editorial in the New York Times headed "Terror by Radio" inadvertently shed light on what Tavistock had in mind for the American people in the coming war, now looming closer. What began as entertainment might readily have ended in disaster. The editorial said radio officials had a responsibility and should think twice before mingling news techniques with fiction so terrifying. What the Times had inadvertently stumbled onto was the wave of the future seen through the eyes of the theologians at Tavistock. How they steer you, that's my thought. Henceforth, mingling news techniques with fiction so terrifying that it would be taken as fact was to be standard practice for the graduates of Tavistock. All news broadcasts were to be adaptations of news and fiction in a skillful blend so as to make the one unrecognizable from the other. In fact, Tavistock put their newly tested theory into practice a year later when the population of cities in Europe, London, Munich, Paris, and Amsterdam were smitten with war jitters, even as Neville Chamberlain was successfully avoiding war using the same techniques that was employed in the October 1938 War of the Worlds radio broadcasts. Well, since I've got some energy here, let me just drink a little bit of water. Okay, around 46 minutes, okay. It's good to see you, Mother Goosekeeper. Thank you for sharing. Sorry you're not here. I think you said you're going to work. Thank you for sharing your opinions. Let's continue on here, and we're going to go to chapter 9. So how individuals and groups react to blending fact with fiction. Contrill's conclusion was that the public reacted exactly as his profiling research experiment had led him to believe it would. That Sunday night, October 30th, 1938, was to become a landmark date in his files and a date signifying a vast paradigm shift forever in the way that news would henceforth be presented. Slightly more than 7 decades later, the world is still being fed a diet of news mingled with fiction. Fiction that is in so many instances is terrifying. The Western world has undergone drastic changes unwillingly forced upon it that it has become a world so vastly different from what it was on that October night in 1938 as to be another planet. We shall return to this vital subject later in this work. Following the Second World War, Cantrill became totally involved with the head guru at Tavistock, his founder, John Rawlings Rees, and his World Tension Project at the United Nations called UNESCO. I'm trying to think what the UNESCO stands for. United Nations Educational, I can't remember, social, anyway, I'll find it and I'll give it to you later on. Actually, I could probably just tell you what it is right now. Here, we just go right up here and sign what it stands for. It stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. It's part of the International Affairs Office at the United Nations. So it's not just simply to do with education, it's also scientific and it's cultural. Interesting. What would they be doing that for? Because what they're doing is simply they are the world government, folks. The United Nations is the world government. Think about it. Profiles on how individuals and groups reacted to international tensions were formulated on the basis of skillful blending fact with terrifying fiction in preparation for a campaign to launch world citizens of a one world government socialistic communist dictatorship that began to be employed to weaken national boundaries, language, and culture, and discredit pride of nation and sovereignty of nation states in preparation for the coming of the socialist New World Order, one world government that President Woodrow Wilson said America would make safe for democracy. These fresh-faced young American boys from Arkansas and North Carolina were sent marching off to Europe believing they were fighting for their country, never knowing that the democracy Wilson sent them to make safe for the world was a socialist international communist one world government dictatorship. And what he's talking about simply is how so many American troops that I talked to, young boys, trying to prevent them many years ago. You really don't want to go to Iraq. You really don't want to go to Afghanistan. You're not fighting for freedom. You're actually helping either corporations or the United Nations to destroy other societies, their culture, and their makeup. I was sharing something today earlier on Facebook to deal with what the United States did in Iraq as it bombed what I call historical sites to destroy them. They're obliterated. And then they stole everything, as far as I know of, from the museums that were there. And probably being put somewhere in storage so no one would know. So they will continue to keep people in the dark of what has happened in the past. So let's continue. John Rawlings Rees was the publisher of Tavistock magazine called Journal of Humanistic Psychology. Their joint thinking mentality is seen in the 1955 monogram towards a humanistic psychology as a progression of Cantrell's support for Tavistock trained Gordon Airport's perception of the personality, as he expressed in it in the 1947 book called Understanding Man's Social Behavior in a chapter on causality. Cantrell's methodology was based on the conception that the particular environment in which growth takes place gives the particular individual a particular direction for growth. Cantrell's endeavors are good examples of the breakdown of boundaries between supposedly neutral opinion taking and social engineering opinion making. Tavistock's commitment to forcing major shifts in personality and behavior in all sectors of target population groups, such as we have sought to describe. Cantrell's appointed a board of directors to assist in this work, among whom were Warren Bennis, Bennis, a follower of Tavistock director Eric Trist, Trist, Marilyn Ferguson, allegedly the author of The Aquarian Conspiracy, Gene Houston, head of the Institute for Brain Research, and also a member of the Club of Rome and author of Mind Games, Aldous Huxley, who supervised the MK Ultra LSD program that ran for 20 years, Willis Hartman, a Stanford University director and mentor of the Changing Image of Man, later disguised as the Aquarian Conspiracy, passed off as the work of Marilyn Ferguson. Michael Murphy, head of the Essence, spelled ESALEN Institute, this is probably another think tank, established by Huxley and others at the Center for Sensitivity Training and Drug Experiments. James F.T. Bugenthal, an initiator of cult creation projects at ESSM. Abraham Maslow, the leading exponent of the irrational think force and founder of AHP in 1957. Carl Rogers, Maslow's co-worker at the AHP in 1957. And I don't understand where AHP is coming from. It doesn't give a name for that, so I don't know what it is. I'll have to look it up. AHP reigning ideology was exemplified by a book review in a 1966 issue of the journal called the Journal of Humanistic Psychology. Reviewing Maslow's book, The Psychology of Science, Willis Hartman, a year before his 67-69 Stanford research study, welcomed the challenge to science from extrasensorial perception, psychokinetics, mysticism, and conscious expanding drugs, particularly LSD and mescaline. I don't much know. MESACALIN. He launched Maslow's new science since it would bring to the fore hypnosis, creativity, parapsychology, and psychedelic experiments, and shift scientific concern away from the outside world to study inner space. This was Cantrell's original particular personality thinking, brought to his logical conclusion. To Cantrell goes the glory and honor of forcing a vast paradigm shift on the way the Western world thinks and behaves. Certainly Oswald Spinnaker would have had no trouble in identifying it as one of the causes of the downfall of the West he had predicted in 1936. Making changes in the cognitive and behavior structures is what they wanted to do. Whatever the particular coloration of ideology that accompanied the scientists of the polling institutions after World War II, the invariant notion of social engineering, trough sampling methods, and opinion research could be found in Cartwright's paper called Some Principles of Mass Persuasion Prepared for the Division of Program Surveys of the Department of Agriculture. The paper was subtitled Selected Findings of Research on the Side of the United States War Bonds. But as Cartwright made clear, the war-related aspects of the survey was just a pretext for conducting analysis on the principles on how perception can be modified to suit whatever ends the controller might have in mind. Now are you seeing this whole thing here, how they're being able to tweak things the way they want people to think? And then when they think they come up with it themselves, when in reality they didn't. And then they will follow wholeheartedly whatever it is. One would be puzzled as to what the sale of war bonds had to do with agriculture, but that was part of Cartwright's methodology. It was the Bernays, Lippmann, and Cantrell, Cartwright's hypnosis synthesized and concentrated in a World War II setting. The article was featured in Tavistock's journal, Human Relations, which ought to immediately brought the reader to attention. Among the many technological advances of the past century that have produced changes in social organization, Cartwright began the development of mass media of communication promises to be the most far-reaching. This heightened interdependence of people means that the possibility of mobilizing mass social action have been greatly increased. Yes, no doubt about that. It is now conceivable that one persuasive person could, through the use of mass media, bend the world's population to his will. We do not believe that Cartwright had Jesus Christ in mind when he made that statement. Under a subheading, Creating a Particular Cognitive Structure, Cartwright continues. Principle 1. It is considered a truism by virtually all psychologists that a person's behavior is guided by his perception of the world in which he lives. It follows from this formation that one way to change a person's behavior is to modify his cognitive structure. The modification of cognitive structure in individual by means of the mass media has several prerequisites. These may be stated in the form of principles. Interspersing, I'll spell this for you, I-N-T-E-R-S-P-E-R-S-I-N-G, his account with examples from the application of his study to the World War II war bond sale drive. Cartwright did elaborate the principle. The messages, i.e. information, facts, etc., must reach the sense organs of the person who are to be influenced. Total stimulus situations are selected or rejected on the basis of an impression of their general characteristics, etc. A second set of principles investigated more deeply the methods of altering cognitive structure. So what they're doing is simply using something, as we would say in the business world, is a slick type of advertising in some ways. But this is far more sinister in what they're doing. Principle 2, having reached the sense organs, messages must be accepted as part of the person's cognitive structure. Cartwright noted in this section that any effect to change behavior through a modification of the cognitive structure must overcome the forces tending to maintain the present structure. This is why people, when you share these things, as I'm sharing right now, they can't handle it. They cannot handle it. They cannot believe that they're actually being manipulated in so many ways. They believe that they're actually coming up with their own perspective, their own opinion, when it actually is being drilled in their heads by certain speakers, and how they do this. And they think they come up with these ideas when it has nothing to do with that. Only when a given cognitive structure seems to the person to be unsatisfactory for his adjustment is he likely readily to receive influences designed to change that structure. Under creating a particular motivational structure, Cartwright analyzed further the social inductions the governors of the U.S. Federal Reserve System in Washington into turmoil for a protracted period. So I'm going to conclude that now. This is going to be chapter 10. I may do another broadcast tonight. It depends on how I feel and what else I'd like to share tonight. But it is so critical for you to understand what is taking place here. Everything has changed dramatically. Even as I was born in 1960, there's this idea simply that we become, in many ways, what do I call it? Urban type of persons in the urban setting that we're in, but yet they don't communicate anymore. People don't speak to one another like they used to, and if it is, it's a very low grade of speech talking. I can remember as a boy with the neighbors I had and how it took place such and such. And and even though it wasn't that close proximity, maybe a tenth of a mile or whatever, there was still this continuity of working together or being treating people like you would like to be treated, type of thing. Um, and how we as boys, me and my brother, were allowed to be on other people's property, and my parents would give support for that. That is, we would choose to not to do any kind of damage whatsoever on the property. It wasn't even ingrained to us. We just knew simply this was someone else's property, but yet we had the opportunity to be on their property and be in nature. And some of my greatest times, actually, as a child, as a teen, not even a teenager, still a child, was being out there in nature. And the many games that we would play with each other or pretend to play in that type of setting was key. Unlike today, most people would not even, are so fearful that they would not let their kids away to do anything of that nature. And also, people would also, on the other side, would not be willing to let a child, to go on their property. They would be afraid that they would be sued. They were afraid that they would be sued in case the child hurt itself on the property. It's amazing how that's over 50 some years ago, how that today doesn't take place. The phenomenon, how people don't do that because, frankly, well, it's other person's property. But we got permission to do that, you see. But the other thing simply is that there would be a fear on that point of the person who owned that property, as though if they would get sued if something happened to that child. So they don't do that anymore, you see. See how these things happen, you see. So I'm going to let that stop now. I appreciate you guys being here. We've gone through quite a bit here. Do you see how this is taking place around you? How we are being steered and manipulated in so many ways in our lives, and we are not even aware of it day by day. How the news is done and presented, all this done by very clever people in the media who are just doing a job, not knowing themselves what they're doing to other people. And not truly, when you think about news, many stations don't even broadcast news anymore, period. But there's only a 3 or 4 minutes, even if it's that much of news per se, but yet it's steered in a certain way. And then you have what we call uh, news radio, that is all day news radio. In fact, you have certain broadcasters do this, and a well known person at one time was get these, it'll come to me, but Rush Limbaugh, who took over that whole gambit, such and such, and it would be a 3-hour program or whatever it was, and how it had the magnetic influence and such with him in the audience, and how people are um, that would be how they would pick up on the ideas of, oh, I came up with this idea, or this is what I thought, when in reality it was already planted in their mind. It was planted in their mind, you see. And it's amazing the transformation of society in the last 60 years that I've lived. And basically, I can remember basically until about 7 or 8 years old, basically, because I'm, not aware of other things, but I could see how this has happened. Um, this is just amazing what has transformed society. And in fact, one of the things that I'm really angry about, or upset about, I should say, is with NPR, National Public Radio, is that at one time, many years ago, this is probably has not been more than 10 years, but I used to enjoy listening to classical music. That was what National Public Radio was about, was funding what I call the arts, that type of thing. And what it's now has become here in the state of South Carolina is all news. It's just all news every day, every minute, the time period. Very little of any other programming. It may be at night, but in the daytime, it is all news. And you can see who wants to listen to that all the time, but it's also very fear-based, enormously fear-based, that people no longer are living their lives, but they're living in fear. And how the government uses that in order to keep people in fear. And it decimates their lives, you see. Everything is broadcast in the last 2 weeks, like I said about the weather deal. All that has been programming. How do they know this? They did it because they did it. It wasn't by nature it did this, folks. It was control, period. How would they know in 10 days in advance or even more that there's going to be some type of storm that's going to come through here and affect, probably at least, more than half of the nation, all the way down to Florida, you see. And that's how much control they have based upon even just with the weather. But anyway, I need to let you go, but I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Mother Goose Keeper. Appreciate your comments. And how, I don't know if they all come from China. I would say simply is that this is what I'm talking about is Tavistock based upon Mr. Coleman. Now, every country that is well known today, powerful, that is politically and militarily, has their own propaganda. That's what they do. Anyway, it's interesting that. Yes, I see you say India has been suing China because they've been practicing weather modification. India says it's changing their weather. Well, yeah, of course they're doing that. But this is more than just the weather here. This is far deeper than that. This is about people no longer living their lives, but they're living in fear. And the news agencies, think about this. This all is taking place. The newspaper was nowhere near as dominant as it is, today. The newspaper doesn't mean anything, but which also meant you had to have some type of education to be able to read and discern things. But now it's all spit out in little spiels, just a little, mini time frame, and it doesn't really go into a whole lot, you see. And it's this headline type of news type of deal. So, but anyway, I wish you a good night, all of you. And again, if you have other questions here, you're more than welcome to share. And thank you for listening. And I hope you continue to come back. And if you get a chance, get this book. That is, if you can get it on PDF, I've told people to look into what I call a group that's called PDF Drive, DRIVE, and you can download this book. No cost to you at all, and you can read it for yourself. All right. Have a good night. Take care.